Hello, my soul-seeking friends. It's Shanna. Thank you so much for listening to Sense of Soul podcast. Enlightening conversations with like-minded souls from around the world, sharing their journey of finding their light within, turning pain into purpose, and awakening to their true sense of soul. If you like what you hear, show me some love and rate, like, and subscribe. And consider becoming a Sense of Soul Patreon member, where you will get ad-free episodes, monthly circles, and much more. Now go grab your coffee, open your mind, heart, and soul. It's time to awaken. Today on Sense of Soul, we have Tricia Carr. She is a certified hypnotherapist, teacher, writer, speaker, producer, voice artist, energy healer, and intuitive. And she's the podcast host of Charmed Life, which is a wonderful podcast I highly recommend. And she's here with us today to tell us all about her journey. So please welcome Tricia Carr. Thank you so much, Tricia, for coming on. I really appreciate it. I look forward to this conversation and to learn more about you.
Oh, thank you. It's an honor. Thanks for having me, Shanna. So nice to meet you.
Yeah,
Virtually.
I know.
Almost
Right.
completely.
I have an amazing YouTube that I love, which I hope to be on still. We had,
Oh,
we
good.
had scheduled and had to reschedule a few
Yes.
times, but in the future, I hope to join you. It's so fun. You know what? Just to start off, for people who don't know who you are, why don't you share how you got into this journey? How did you get to where you are?
That's always a great question, and yet, where to start. So as I tap in and kind of check with higher self where we want to start. Thank you. Okay. So, when I was a child, I actually have a pretty difficult childhood. I'll skim over that part a bit, but essentially it was filled with rage and abuse and alcoholism and violence. And then that was like the first part of the childhood. And then the second part of the childhood until I was 18 was a lot of abuse of all of the different kinds without having to trigger anyone, was concentrated on me by the person who was married to my mother. So, I actually, when I left the home at 18, like 2 weeks after high school graduation, I seriously had PTSD. And so my 20s were interesting. I actually attracted a relationship that was, I call like a cult of two, where there was a narcissist who controlled me very much like a cult leader. It was like an improvement over the person who had controlled me before, because my body was my own in that situation still somehow. And then, but throughout my 20s, and the through line in there, when I was 11, I actually took myself to church. My family didn't go to church, but it was the only spiritual exploration that's presented probably to most of us when we're children. And I mean, I also bought those little astrology rolls at the corner store. So, like that was like the esotericism that I was interested in. It was kind of a spark in there. And, and the church didn't quite work for me anymore by the time I was 20. And then at somewhere along the lines there, I definitely was continuing my prayer, and they didn't call it meditation in church, but I clearly recognize it now as meditation, and also channeling, which again, they didn't call it that, and mediumship, speaking to angels and spirit guides in different ways. Again, I didn't totally recognize it as that. Another through line through all of this is my animals. I'm an animal communicator, and I didn't realize other people, I didn't know that word for it, but it's always been online for me. And so my animals, I've never lived without animals as a part of my life, as a part of my family, as my primary family. And my husband knows this and he embraces it. My husband now. So anyway, there was some kind of through line of spiritual practice and experience. And then a lot of healing occurred, probably around the Saturn return. And then when I turned 30, I met my husband, and that was amazing. And then at about 38 or 9, I started I had this almost spontaneous spiritual awakening. My life had improved in ways that I could never have imagined, having lived in poverty and abuse for most of my life before that. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't married to my husband yet, but we'd been together a long time. And I woke up one morning really going like, what is this that I'm feeling? And I'm like, I let it bubble, the feeling bubble up to a thought. And the thought was something that just was not accurate to my life. It didn't make any sense. And I couldn't even find a place for it. I'm like, that's weird. That doesn't make any sense. And I've got enough of my own toxic thoughts that I don't need extra thoughts that don't even align with my world and my psyche. And so for the first time in my life, I had this prompting, this interest to get a psychic reading, a 15-minute phone psychic reading. I thought maybe it'll just be a fun little thing. My mind is strong. I remember saying that. So it's not a big deal. And the first thing the psychic said to me was, well, you're an empath, right? And I was like, what, Counselor Troy from Star Trek? I don't know what you're talking about. So, but at the same time was kind of having a cathartic cry and release because my soul was telling me this is what you need to recognize. So it moved pretty quickly from there. I opened up, animal communication was opened up to where the first time I consciously communicated with an animal and I knew I was telepathically communicating with her, the information that we exchanged saved her life. And she lived for another 8 years after that. I mean, verifiably by, doctors. And then mediumship opened up right after that, channeling and teaching all along the way. And I've always been a teacher. So yeah, that's it. And, the empath thing, I'm a reflector in human design. And so that all of the centers are undefined. And that makes a lot of sense then, that I have no filter between myself and outside energies. So yeah, there we are.
Wow, my journey is very similar. That Saturn return that I think that most people can relate to.
Yeah.
I was going to therapy I was in Al-Anon, and I also was in therapy for like codependency. And it was a therapist that said, have you ever heard of an empath? I mean, a therapist. Like,
I love
what?
that. I love when
Right?
a therapist, yes, I love that. Mm-hmm.
And it was like in the early 2000s. I mean, and there was nothing online about it, like maybe one or two things.
Mm-hmm.
I could not find much about it at all. But it kind of made me feel like, okay, this makes sense. I've always been, made fun of because I was overly sensitive or really codependent, which I think is just a toxic,
Yeah, absolutely.
Aspect of an empath.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's and the codependency that can occur with an empath, it isn't necessarily always in behavior or like so overt that it's something that's happening in a relationship. I mean, it is, but it can also be very subtle, kind of as a foundation of what's going on. Because when we say, I feel other people's emotions and maybe those become thoughts or whatever, as though they are my own, just because you can feel it doesn't mean you should. And what do we do with it? Do we hold on to it, or do we just kind of like, oh, there's that information and release it? So it does require a lot of self inner awareness. We're not a victim to this. It's actually a gift, not a weakness. It's to be able to have sensitivity to everything and everyone means that we're informed about how to be a part of the ecosystem and to have compassion for everyone and everything, but fundamentally ourselves. So yeah, it's like the immune system of the emotional body, I think, being the empathic nature. It's meant to heal us. It's meant to be a mechanism that maintains our healing, as opposed to, when we have an autoimmune disease, the immune system that is quote unquote attacking itself. So then when the empathic nature is turned the wrong way, it attacks itself, right?
That's kind of funny because actually one of the first symptoms I connect with being an empath is an autoimmune disease, because I feel like I literally started to take on the physical symptoms of everyone around me. And I thought it was crazy. I think everyone can relate to, for me, it'd be like, my kids have a headache. Now I have a headache, right? And I actually had some distance situations like that with my kids where my daughter hurt her foot at school and I'm feeling it, across town. And so it's very interesting, some of those physical aspects of the empath.
I know we didn't really talk about human design, but it sounds like you have an undefined spleen. Do you know if that, or because people with undefined spleens can feel other people's symptoms, their physical symptoms, because it is the center that manages the immune system. So it's really interesting.
That's interesting. I don't know for sure. I'll have to look. I don't know.
The other center that really is like the empath one is the solar plexus, the emotional solar plexus. When that's undefined, that's the picking
Okay.
up other people's emotions as it is their own. But any of the undefined centers basically has that empathic nature. My husband is very defined in his body, like his centers are very defined, but his third eye and head are undefined. And he just realized recently while he was playing tennis that he was like, I was noticing that, I feel really unfocused when people are watching, like observing the tennis match that he's playing. And then he goes, I realized I was thinking thoughts that I was like, I don't normally think those when no one's watching. He goes, do you think that I'm picking up on other people's thoughts? I'm like, 100%, you have those centers open. He goes, okay, well, I'm not an empath, so how's that possible? I'm like, no, but that's an empathic sensing that happens with your mind. So yeah,
Right.
there's a lot of ways that we are unfiltered to the outside
Right.
energies, potentially, yeah.
So, you know how they always say like the empath and the narcissist have like this dance, right? And I feel like I've done this with many. And I've always been one of those I'll fix you kind of people. Of course, I don't feel that way anymore, but yeah, there is also a lot of similarities.
Mhm.
And I wonder how you feel about the chameleon part.
Mhm.
I am one like that. I can have a conversation with you and then completely shift into a different energy with someone else with no problem.
Mhm.
And I've heard people talk about it being a negative thing, and I don't see it. I see it only a negative thing if you're using it to deceive or manipulate people.
Or if you are losing yourself again as a codependent. So those are the two ways, yeah, it could be negative. And so once again, this is just our presence with ourself, our compassion and awareness of the self. But yes, and that is something that is a tendency of the undefined G center or the identity center. So once again, I'm so fascinated to see what your chart is. You would be too if I
Right.
explained it to you in these things. But at any rate, that could also have to do with, even if it's not defined, it could be hanging gates. But yeah, the chameleonic tendency is actually really beautiful. If you think about the spirit animal chameleon, or think about chameleon as a spirit animal, what the chameleon does by coming into the environment, the chameleon starts to bring in certain energies and then, yes, creates a certain skin appearance, but it's more than that. They're also emitting different kinds of enzymes. Like it's for their own health as they're in this ecosystem. It's also a contribution to the ecosystem. When it's not right anymore for the chameleon and maybe the colors are changing and it isn't supporting their well-being fundamentally, they're also not giving well-being back to the ecosystem. So then it's time for them to move on. So that capacity to be a chameleon, as chameleon spirit animal teaches us, is to have self-love, and that overflows to unified love and direction. It's time for me to move. It's time for me to go here and find the optimal space and place to be love for myself and the ecosystem. So,
Okay. And I was going to ask you, what made you an echo spiritual teacher, but now I
um,
understand. That's the animal community. I'm like a bird lady.
oh,
So
I
like
have birds
every
too.
single morning, well, I have dogs too. But every morning I go out in my backyard, actually even on my front porch, because right now they laid an egg in my nest on my front door, but it's on the lower part of the wreath.
Is it morning dove?
So no, but I have had mourning doves on my front porch, but no, these are little tiny finches.
Oh, cute.
And there's 4 eggs. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's gonna be a lot. But every time you open the door, the one almost comes in and hits, the mama like comes to like straight at you. So we're like ducking. My little girl was hit in the head the other day. I'm like, you should have did it on top, like you usually do. I don't understand, but yeah, I'm surrounded by lots of wildlife, lots of birds. It was it yesterday? The hugest hawk. I mean, right above my head. I have a lot of experiences with animals. They're just it's nature. The trees have taught me so many things. So I get
Mhm.
it. And you just talking about that, the chameleon. It's so poetic, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Well, chameleon
Yeah.
taught me that. Chameleon spirit animal taught me that. Yeah, animals
Yeah.
are open vessels for divine energy. And this is how
Mm.
they're so well, they're just naturally spirit messengers because they just, they don't have this kind of analytical, language oriented, conscious, overthinking mind that humans have. Humans are unique in that. That's what makes us so different from nature, honestly. Even though we are nature, it makes us so distinctive from nature. And
Mhm.
so without, they just are, they are moved, they are compelled as a part of, again, just serving the ecosystem to be there as a divine energy and messages for us.
So, I don't know if you've heard this story. You mentioned meeting dove on my porch, but so when it comes to synchronicity, I didn't realize how very true it is that there is good synchronicity and bad synchronicity.
And what do you mean
And
by bad? It's giving us warnings, or how do you mean bad?
well, I mean, this is pretty darn bad. So I've been studying the Gnostic Gospels.
Oh, great.
And so I've had many, many experiences with the dove in my backyard, the
Mhm.
mourning doves, and really divine. And I talk about this in the first few episodes of my mini series and in my book. One day I was studying, when you go down the Sophia Road in the Gnostic Gospels, you'll go down secret societies. And so I had already been deep into it with the Templar, whatever. But this particular night, I put in Jesuits and Templar. And all of a sudden, I get a warning on my phone and it says suspicious activity. And I'm like, oh, that's weird. But 30 minutes later, and it was at night and there was a storm, but my son's letting his friend out and a dove drops dead on my porch.
Wow. So you
I
mean
was
like an
like,
omen, basically like a bad omen.
the dove was so significant to my journey. I just got the warning. Boom. And then I live in Denver. So, they've got this mural of like this, Nazi killing a white dove. And, I just, all of these things were popping in my head. And then well, it was 2 weeks later, I was with my little girl out front and two baby doves were born on my porch. And I had been sitting with the lone dove for a while because, they always have mates.
Hmm. Yeah.
So the one that had died must have been her mate. And then literally two baby doves were born on my porch. It was like 2 weeks later.
Oh,
It was crazy.
that's
So
beautiful.
then it was like Return of the Dove.
What do you think
You
it
know,
was the warning, though? What was the warning?
I go back and forth about it. But I do think that they were trying to get me to steer away from the things that I was discovering.
I see. So it was you got the browser warning saying suspicious content or something like that. And
Yes.
then,
Yeah.
and so that was, I mean, clearly you know, that was algorithmic, obviously, but
Yeah.
you took a significance to it. And so did you
Yeah.
not pursue what you were pursuing? It felt like you shouldn't be
Actually,
pursuing
I
that.
did. So everything was fine until I looked up the Jesuits. And
Okay.
so
Okay.
I did back off on that. I do have an ancestral connection and story that's not so good with the Jesuits. So I wonder if there's just something in my DNA, in a past life or just in my lineage. And I just can't, I'm not to go there. So when I got the new baby doves though, and I felt so much power, I mean, I literally cried.
Mm.
And I thought, Return of the Dove. And I went right back into my work and with no fear, but I have left the Jesuits alone.
Mm. Well, would you be interested in some like other potential meanings and reflections on that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for
So
sure.
we're here, I mean, we are here to create meaning. That's actually what our free will is best at, is to create meaning from it. So just if I were to take like a shift of perspective, there's again just to present how we could expand what these potential signs and synchronicities are, is that the dove, I mean, there isn't actually fundamentally anything bad about death, right? And I feel like that's something that was lorded over us and always has been lorded over us in kind of when we have an outside authority that is punishing and utilitarian of us, whether that's the church or just our own makings of what that, or the government, the church, the government, or, what we see as the bad daddy, in my life, like the punishing inner critical voice is the daddy that thinks you're bad and is, so, but this threat of death and the symbology of death has, in certain kinds of mythology and lore, been something to frighten us. And, it's interesting because negative correction isn't sustainable. Negative reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is sustainable. Negative reinforcement can, for a moment, get someone to do something, but it doesn't foster a relationship, and it doesn't foster growth. And, companies like Google are getting that because they're like trying to support their employees, these bigger companies. But anyway, so if we take out the assumption and that death is bad, there are other kinds of spiritual paradigms. I'm thinking of like Oaxaca and Dia de los Muertos kind of art. They actually, they revere the death passage and, welcome the art that has actually presents dead animals or dead, partially dead humans, because it's like they're somewhere in the liminal space and they're continuing to move on and, continuing to be a part of the life. And then you have the cycle where then there was a hatching, there was new life. Every year we have a death. This is what the winter solstice is for us in the northern hemisphere. And then the dawning of the light opening back up. So again, for us to recognize that we are moving through death all the time, it's a part of life and it's a part of the soul's journey. So then I wonder if, because you said you have ancestry that might be connected to this, that it's before you move forward, if it resonates for you, maybe it doesn't resonate for you to move forward. Maybe that is the message. Don't move forward with that. But if you ever did have the urge to from, of a presence, maybe we'll resolve this portion of it. Perhaps how there is a fear of death or how your ancestors were killed or something in the process, and to realize that there is no actual death and that your ancestry and that soul lineage continues on and is reborn and when it is reborn. Anyway, those are just some thoughts. Hope you don't mind.
No, I love that.
You may have it exactly right. I just thought, let's talk about symbology in expanded ways too,
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that symbolism has been one of the biggest parts of my journey. If I say that I have any kind of gift, it's the gift of just being present to be able to see all of the signs, and symbols everywhere, whether they're in dreams or wherever. And, I've really learned to trust and lean into them because this journey does require, quite a bit of trust.
Yes, it's true. I heard a conversation between one person completely secular and another person who is a religious person. And the secular, actually, he's an atheist person, said that, he agreed that we need some kind of sense of faith just to be able to be here. And not that it has to be, and for this atheist person, he said, that doesn't have to be religion. It can be absolutely atheistic like I have it, but I have to have a sort of presence of faith in order to keep my nervous system regulated. You know what I mean? Like to know that in the next moment I can still survive. And the religious person said, that is true, but most people need religion or something. That was his opinion. Most people can't just have that. But I think spiritual seekers like we are, we're somewhere in between, right? We're like, this symbolism is helping me, but also it doesn't own me like a religion or a dogma does. I think we're somewhere in between that place. So but I agree, it requires some kind of faith just to be present in this world.
Yeah, and that self-trust when you receive things and it's like, there's no way that I could have thought of this myself. So where does this drop in? Where does this come from? And I always, like I had said, even with the dove, is it somewhere in my DNA? Is it somewhere in a past life? Or is it all of the above?
Yeah, right. No, it's fascinating. Yeah, what we are influenced, even just on the physical line of it, like we're influenced by we actually hold about 100 generations of DNA within us. And that's a generation is 25 years. So 250 to 2,500 years of just on the physical level of, kind of like coding. That's what DNA really is like, right? It's like computer coding. So yeah, and it does seem that we tend to have also past lives in our own lineage, which is really interesting,
Yeah.
right? It's
Mhm.
fascinating to think about that.
All of these spiritual connections, do you believe they're part of our soul family? Do
Oh,
you buy
for
into
sure.
that?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that makes a lot of sense to me. And I've had, my own experiences where I'm on my own, having with no guidance, so there's no one to influence this into me. That, like for example, one of the times that I did a deep life between life exploration, the only like kind of imagery of this place was just like a tabletop that was like a selenite, made of selenite, kind of something like that. But the symbolism was, it was like a conference table. It was like the boardroom table. And we were
Nice.
creating my soul vortex that would create this life. And there was, like different kinds of guides, but my mother was there and I felt her presence there. So it makes a lot of sense. And then, and the, contracts are things that it's like before we journey into it, it's like, hey, in this life I want to explore the, what it's like to be highly sensitive and have a tendency to codependency. And this other one's like, great, I want to explore what it's like to have a tendency to narcissism. Okay, cool. Maybe we'll get married and we go down into this journey. But then maybe instead of, maybe I have a boss as an adult who's like a narcissist and I stand up to them and then I kind of resolve that, then I won't even be attracted to any of that contract won't have its relevance anymore. I don't know. Like those kinds of things. I think
Right.
that makes a lot of sense. But absolutely our animals are our own soul. Our animals come from
Yeah.
our own higher self or are really more like our oversoul. But that's why they are so our body. Like my neighbor, my next door neighbor is a dog behaviorist. And so he's got all kinds of dogs coming through there all the time. He boards like up to 8 at a time. So like about 3 weeks ago, I met one dog that he was fostering for just a little bit. And I was like, uh-oh, we're in love. I was like, it was a
Oh.
soul recognition. It was like, I just saw him and I felt that. I hadn't even pet him yet. And I love all
Oh.
animals, but there was something that was so deeper. And it was like where you go, he's mine. I didn't adopt him because I don't have room in my home. It was for him to go
Oh.
somewhere else. But I felt that. I felt that
Oh.
remembrance and recognition.
Wow. Yeah, I feel like that with babies sometimes. No, but I love dogs too. I wish my neighbor was a dog behavior
Yeah, I
trainer because
get to see
my
him a lot.
dog is bossy as hell and she's too big to be bossy. But you know what? I I feel like there's obviously something a lot deeper, and there's all these other cosmology stories that we've never heard before. What do you think about root races and what's your theory on where we came from, and are we connected to the people who might have been from up there in the stars?
Yes, that makes sense to me. And I'll tell you, similar to you, I wasn't, I do like to do that in a general sense. For most things that I'm exploring and investigating, I investigate first. I would say internally, but I mean internally with my higher self, my spirit team. And then it might either come to me or I do some outer investigation. And it's really cool when you see that other people are having at least similar experiences. In the sense of animals and working with animals, I also teach animal communication, but I think this was before. Oh, no, I was probably teaching it. But I remember just asking, this was ages ago, asking, like, why are we so different than nature and animals? Why are we so different? Basically, why can we disregard ecosystem? Why can we, if you don't mind my saying, shit where we eat? You know what I mean? It's natural for most animals. Well, carnivorous animals do kill and take the physical life of others, but even just eating plants, you are eating a soul energy. I mean, a plant has a soul as well and has a consciousness and is sentient. And then you would be displanting the ecosystem, and there's other bacteria, which are animals. Anyway, the point is,
Yeah,
they
living
tend to,
things.
yeah, they just tend to naturally do that in a way that is more sustainable if we don't interfere. Like why? And it's not just about eating; it's about all of the things. Why are we so different? And then that's not only it. I was saying we're the only ones who can like kind of let our mind hijack our nature. And while animals can experience trauma, it's still not like the way that we lose touch, and we have a veil of illusion that we are in, that animals and they don't have, they of course know that we go on, you know what I mean? They aren't preoccupied with it either. It's just like they're also more present. So all these things, why are we so different? And it was like, again, before I had talked to anyone about this, it was like, well, you're not from here naturally. And I'm like, oh, of course, that makes sense. And that we're a hybrid race, that we are a part of a root race, you know, we're like in a hybridization of it. There's a root race of a hominid that is more natural to this planet, that is a part of the hybridization, but then there's other kinds of races that are in that mix. And that root race I'm talking about is what we tend to call Sasquatch or Bigfoot, and they still exist. They are here. They didn't like eradicate them in this hybridization process, but they're more advanced than we are, and they live transdimensionally, and so they go into and out of the earth portals, and they're telepathic. So that makes a lot of sense to me, and it is a part of what I experience and what I even teach. Is I teach things like multidimensional mediumship, how to be in contact with our benevolent elders, if you will, helpers and friends that are what we might call ETs, I guess. Yeah, some of them aren't. Some of them are here, living in the planet, living in the water, they're here, or they're just here and on a slightly different frequency that we aren't able to perceive. They may be living beneath Mount Shasta. They are definitely seem to have colonies that are submerged in the earth. There are ships that we can't detect with our equipment that are above the earth, maybe around the earth, maybe, you know, a mile or two, kind of there to help us or monitor us. Yeah. But yes, so yes, big and resounding yes.
I mean, it's kind of silly to think otherwise.
Right. Oh, and you know what? Speaking of, when I was a teenager and I was still in religion and in Christianity, and I actually had a lot of spiritual development while I was in Christianity, you know what I mean? And then at some point, the narrative and the church and the culture, that didn't foster my spiritual growth anymore. So I took my spiritual growth on, you know, without that, what was limiting for me. But I was actually contemplating and studying, and I got like a download when Jesus says, I have other sheep who are not of this pen. And I was a teenager. No, I'd never considered ETs or not ETs. It wasn't something. And I was like, oh my gosh, he's talking about other planets. He's talking about other galaxies.
Okay, so Tricia, here you go. I got this one for you.
Yeah.
So when I picked up the Bible with new eyes, because I'm a recovering Catholic, so picked it up with new eyes, read it. I didn't get past Genesis, like first few chapters, because I'm thinking, holy crap, are angels aliens? This is what it sounds like.
This is what they told me. There's not really a difference. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, of course, they're interdimensional beings.
Yeah.
So, but what's crazy is is that when the angels, I think it's the seraphim, when it's described as having 4 faces of a lion, an ox, an eagle, and a human, I'm like, how do we know that this isn't just like me saying I'm French, Italian, German, Czechoslovakian? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
How do we know that these aren't all just what they described as root races? Being
Exactly.
like, I am different. I'm from different places here.
Right.
The lion's always there. You know, you have many depictions of the lion, which could be connected to Lyrans. Which is, yeah.
And so this is the other time that it dawned on me. Again, I hadn't talked to anyone, I hadn't heard about star seeds or anything. And I was in meditation. It was after I'd had that revelation, like, you're not from here naturally. You know, there's a hybridization that has occurred. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Then sometime, I don't remember what the timing is, I have it journaled. I was in meditation and deep trance. And a lion person approached me who was blue. And he told me his name was Leon, which to me didn't sound fancy at all. I thought it was hilarious. You know, I was at this place. I still am. I'm like, okay, there. Yeah, it's a lion person. This imagery is here for me. And, you know, some guide is connecting with me in this way. And then I later went and got in my car to go to some work thing. And I didn't have YouTube on my phone. It turned itself on and started playing a video about the Lyrans. And said they do often appear to be blue because of the way that their light on, you know, a planet lands on them, and that they're bipedal. Some of the Lyrans, at least most of them, are bipedal lion beings. And I was like, and I hadn't even heard of any of it. You don't have
Right.
to
And
investigate
this
it.
has been, in the Gnostic Gospels, Sophia's first creation is Yaldabaoth. He's a lion-faced serpent. So you always have these different hybrid animals, even in Hinduism, you have them in all the cultures.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, were they actual animals? Maybe, but was it also likely that these were just representing the stars, maybe even the constellations that they're
Yeah,
in? They named all the constellation after animals as well,
exactly.
so there's got to be some sort of connection. I
Yeah,
think that there is.
right.
I think that it's hidden in plain sight, basically.
Yes. And
Yeah.
so my root race, the eldest part of my lineage is Lyran. So it's amazing that you
Yeah.
bring that up. And that's what I kind of got from that. And before that, this is really rad too. So one of the very first things that occurred, that opened up for me, is that the archangel, like the architect of my oversoul, the archangel
Mhm.
is Archangel Ariel, and she's called the Lioness of God.
Oh, there you go.
And then again, further investigation, and it's like she oversees the constellation of Leo, and like all of these different things that just keep
Right.
showing up. I'm not actually looking for them; they keep showing up,
Right. It's
in
like
even
little
in
dots
yeah,
connecting him.
and not even like in my research. Like when I sat down, this was again way early in my spiritual awakening journey, and I sat down and said, because I had heard, oh, you can ask the name of your guardian angel. I sat down and asked that, and I heard Ariel, and I was like the Little Mermaid. That's weird. I didn't even think to make the connection to the EL being like an angelic name, and then I
Mm.
Googled and found out that she was,
Yeah.
the archangel who oversees animals and nature and sensitives, and I had already started my animal communication practice. So it's like, at some point, like you said, your personal anecdotal evidence of how spirit is communicating to you is like, well, do you believe this? I don't need it to be a belief. I have an experience of it. That's what I like to. I try to be in charge of my beliefs.
But let me ask you, is Lion Gate a part of the Lyran connection?
I think so. Yes, that's what it seems like to me. That,
Yeah.
well, because if you think about it, so the Lyran civilization is the planets that they seem to have created, the planets and stars are in that Sirius star constellation, right? And Leo in that area too. So the Lionsgate that occurs every year from, it's like July 28th to August 12th, and the peak is on the 8th, and it's a portal that opens, and it does align with the Leo season and the full moon and all these different things, these alignments that allow this portal to open. And it allows this portal to open not because these cosmological energies, as they move through their seasons and their stimulations, it causes that amplification and openness in us. And, just as a very small example, people who think that it's a bunch of, just like junk, that it's, anything to do with astrology is dumb. Just ask any person who is a bartender or works in an ER, and they will tell you that there is an effect. They brace themselves for full moons. Anyone who's a first
Really?
responder or works with alcohol, they'll be like, yeah, no, it's a thing.
Where the word lunatic comes from too. I mean, I love the full moon energy though.
Yeah. So the Lionsgate portal is expanding in my heart. And so, like I said, Archangel Ariel oversees the whole Leo energy and the lion, and she's called the Lioness of God. So it is a very powerful activation. And especially if we bring awareness to it, for that time. I just enjoy it so much. So I think I'm going to be having a channeling experience, because I didn't do it. I don't think I didn't do it last year, but I did it the year before. And it is something that people really resonate with it. And so do I. So I, channel. It feels like this one that is coming up, I may be bringing through Archangel Ariel and the Lyran. So I might.
Such a very vital year, I feel. I
Yeah,
feel that, and
it
then
is.
it's right before so many things. And I hate to say, there's any bad powers of be, but I believe it's those who are in power understand this power, and so they use it for their own good instead of like collectively. And I believe this is a time for all of us who are aware to reclaim that light for ourselves and for humanity and for Earth.
Mhm.
And so I think this is like that time that it's really happening. I
Well,
mean,
yeah,
because like before, no one would be able to know about this stuff, but because of technology, we've been able to share.
absolutely. So what's really interesting is that Spirit has told me that all mysteries are open secrets now because
Exactly.
we're actually in post information age. We're actually past the information age, and the age that we're in, what I call it, is the consciousness age. And honestly, back in 2020, I could actually sample this clip. I was bringing through Archangel Metatron about this upcoming metaverse, which still hasn't like dawned on us. AI actually preceded it, but and I channeled it to the students or the people that were in the class that so we had the industrial age and the commodity of the collective was labor, was their energy, was their work. And then we have the information age, and the commodity of that, the commercial commodity, is data. They got our data. But all we can do really with
Yeah.
our data is market stuff to us. So again, marketing something to me and me accepting it or not requires my conscious awareness, right? So it actually can do me good. I don't have to be suggestible to how they utilize my data. So that's kind of cool. It's not necessarily
Yeah.
fair, of course, but bad things happened in order for them to get our data. But anyway, point is, the next commodity is our consciousness. And I have it to where in this class in 2020, I just said that and I didn't really know what it meant. And a student was like, well,
Wow.
what does that mean? What does that look like? And I said, well, I frankly don't know yet because I don't know what they're inventing. But here's the thing with AI, they are capable of taking our words, our voice, our essence. It's happening to actors. I mean, it's happening to writers. And so we have to figure it is actually like taking our consciousness. This is why the industry that I'm in Los Angeles and tangentially involved with the industry had to strike. Just one of the reasons is because they don't rehire actors to reshoot something. They just make it up from their and so they make up their performance. Like that's not okay. Anyway, yeah, so that's where we are. And to your point of basically like spiritual technology, it's always been the way things are done. The way that a person is influenced is by getting to their subconscious mind, which is basically a form of hypnosis, always a form of hypnosis. I don't want to bring any political names in here because I don't want anyone to be offended. A certain very famous politician who is very prominent in our country is trained in certain kinds of rapid hypnotic inductions, neurolinguistic programming, and other kinds of basically what we could use as spiritual technology. Also,
Yeah.
one Putin this is well known that Putin he has a mystic on his council, on his main council.
Oh,
But anyway, the
wow.
point is the tools work, and that's just what
Yeah.
it is. And it's of course the intention and of course the skillfulness with which we use spiritual technology.
Yes.
But yeah, it's always been,
They've
and
been,
yes. Mhm.
yes, it's always been. And they've been the keeper of this wisdom for so long in secret.
Mhm.
But like you said, now it's no longer a secret. The mysteries are out. That's
Yeah.
100%. And these younger generations just don't, they're just not as conditioned as we are.
Yeah.
They have told me about stuff like a CERN. I didn't even know what CERN was. It was my children who told me about CERN.
Mhm.
It was my children who told me about many things that were happening in the world that I had no idea, whether it was about race or whether it was about animals that were going extinct or the global warming. Even though it seems like everything is falling, like you said earlier, the end or the death or the, transition is actually a beautiful thing. And so maybe we
Yeah.
should hold on, just hold on.
Well, and the thing is, we don't need to even acknowledge that there are powers that be. I think that's a big shift
Right.
and the younger generations are showing us that. They're like, well,
Yes,
the
they
power
don't.
that is in me, is me. And that is how we must first be sovereign, and then we can collaborate in healing and in holism. So, but breaking the model of there being a segregation. And honestly, again, that's what
Yes.
there is any kind of separation. So while we're here to be human and physical, we are more greatly spiritual and omnidimensional. And to be able to not collectively, but completely occupy all of our dimensionality. So yes, there's a veil, But that veil is there for my utility, for me to use the veil. Again, it's like a belief. The belief is for me. I'm not mastered by the belief. I am the master of the belief. So the veil is there to help me to have this experience of being physical, but also it's not keeping me from anything. And that's what I think we are shifting into. And it does have to do with the suppression of, the pendulum swinging about the goddess or the divine feminine, because something else that I channeled, for example, climate crisis and our capacity to be able to hurt our earth. I mean, the earth is so much healthier and her immune system, it is so much stronger. She will outlive us. So she will kick us off the planet. Just like when we're sick, it's like, is the virus going to get me, or is my immune system going to overcome it? Well, the immune system of the earth will overcome it. But our capacity to be able to do that collectively is because of our disconnect from Mother.
No.
And from putting her voice in the closet. Yeah.
It's the day, it's the time. Like, honor the days of being buried in some Nagamati or burned at the stake for just being a woman. I mean, I heard this the other day. It was shocking. Do you know that for only the last 50 years has it been that a woman was able to get a credit card without a man's signature?
I actually heard that recently too. Yeah, it was only like in the 70s or something. Yeah, it's crazy.
It's shocking.
Well, so not a credit card, open a bank account. That's what it was. Yeah, but it's
probably that too. Any kind of credit, I mean, that's amazing. Well, and then I think about how I spend money with. Well, this is generational. It's going to get better eventually. I appreciate you. I appreciate your voice and just being a strong voice for women. I do feel so much goddess energy with you.
Thank you.
And thanks so much for coming on. Everybody go and visit your podcast, your website, and all of your classes that you offer. Can you tell everybody about them and where they can go?
Sure. So you could, just Google my name. It's spelled TRICIACARR. But my website's Tricia Carr, Charm, and my podcast is Charmed Life. So yes, I'm teaching spiritual, intuitive development, helping people to be able to have that dissolved veil between themselves. And so developing not, intuition, but intuitive abilities, literally, or psychic abilities, helping us to, stay deconditioned from that and have that inner sovereignty and to have a life that's composed of one miracle after the other. I have development programs that are we always start with personal, spiritual, and intuitive development. And then in going into bigger experiences like self-initiated astral travel, remote viewing, telepathy, beyond being able, and also channeling and energy healing. And then also I teach classes for people to be able to do that as a profession, if that's what they choose, being a spiritual hypnotherapist and healer and channel. And and animal communication too, I teach as well. Yeah. Thank you for asking.
Wow. Yeah, a woman. Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it. It was so good to meet you finally.
Thank you, Shanna.
Thanks for listening to Sense of Soul podcast, and thanks to our special guests for joining me. If you want more of Sense of Soul, check out my website at www.mysenseofsoul.com, where you can work with me one-on-one or help support Sense of Soul podcast by donating to my coffee fund. Thanks for listening.